Hello and welcome to this edition of Back in History. In Back in History, we take you back in time to the events that occurred in the historical past. We also make documentaries on the life and times of persons who passed through the corridors of history and left imprints on the sands of time. One of such persons was a lady known as Mary Slessor. We shall take you through her birth, parentage, education, and her sacrificial missionary life in present-day Cross River State, Nigeria, where she lived and worked for many years for the love of humanity. Mary Slessor was born on 2nd December 1848. She was born in Aberdeen, Scotland. Her father was Robert Slessor and her mother was Mary Slessor. The young Mary Slessor was the second child in a family of 7. Her parents were deeply religious people and were members of the Presbyterian Church in Scotland. Mary Slessor was born at a time when several countries of the world were being colonized by Britain and other superpowers in Europe. Colonial administrators were deployed from these countries to travel by sea to Africa and carry on the work of the administration of the colonial territories for their home countries. In the course of time, the colonial administrators introduced formal education to the territories. Teachers were recruited from Europe and posted to Africa for this purpose. Experts in the needed fields of human endeavor were also recruited and posted. Coming along with these people also were Christian missionaries and social workers. The missionaries introduced Christianity to the colonial territories and built schools close to their mission houses. Most of the Christian missionaries were also teachers. While they did the work of teaching, the social workers assisted them in various ways, including assisting in evangelization of the native people, running of dispensaries, and other medical facilities. While growing up in Scotland, Mary Slessor started reading a monthly missionary magazine called The Missionary Record. This magazine was published by the United Presbyterian Church of Scotland. The magazine kept members of the church in Scotland abreast with the activities of Christian missionaries in Africa. Most church members in Scotland got inspired by the work of the missionaries as reported in the magazine and signed up to join them in Africa. Mary Slessor began to develop interest in missionary work in Africa based on what she read in the monthly magazine and the stories told in Scotland by missionaries that traveled home from Africa on holidays. Most of these missionaries were seen as heroes in Scotland, and many young persons aspired to follow in their footsteps by going on similar mission to Africa. This is how Mary Slessor took special interest in missionary work and made an application to the United Presbyterian Church's Foreign Mission Board. She was 27 years old when she made the application. The board accepted her application and invited her for training in Edinburgh. After training in Edinburgh, she set sail in a ship called SS Ethiopia on the 5th day of August 1876 with her relation Robert Mitchell Bede, a missionary from New Day in Bochan. Robert and Mary Slessor had the same grandmother. 1 month from the commencement of their journey, the ship arrived in West Africa and Mary Slessor was posted to the Calabar region in present-day Nigeria. From then on, she dedicated her life to the cause of humanity till her death. On arrival in Calabar, Mary Slessor lived in the missionary compound. Calabar is a coastal area, and a lot of missionaries had arrived in Calabar and settled thereat even before the arrival of Mary Slessor. They had a missionary compound where most of the missionaries lived until deployment to the hinterland. Mary Slessor lived in the missionary compound for 3 years, working first in the missions in Creek Town and Old Town in present-day Cross River State. Mary developed special love for what she was doing for the people and with the people. She wanted to go deeper into Calabar to meet more people and impact their lives positively, but she contracted malaria and was forced to return to Scotland for treatment. At that time, malaria was the biggest killer of white missionaries in Africa, as there was no readily available cure for the parasite. Mary Slessor traveled by sea from Calabar and arrived in Dundee for the treatment. She later recovered from the malaria parasite and used the opportunity to have holidays in Scotland and live with her mother and siblings. 16 months after, Mary Slessor returned to Calabar to continue what she described as her unfinished missionary work. She returned by sea, as there were no planes at the time to fly missionaries directly to Africa. In essence, the early white missionaries came to Africa through the sea routes. On her return to Calabar, Mary did not live in the missionary compound anymore. Her new assignment was in Old Town, about 3 miles farther into Calabar, and Mary decided to move into the local community and settle there with the natives. There were no basic amenities in her place of primary assignment, but Mary was determined to live in Old Town with the people and work daily with them. The first thing she did was to learn to eat the native food of the people she lived with. This assisted her immensely in saving costs. In her new place of assignment, Mary Slessor discovered to her surprise that twins were being killed at birth, on the narrative that such children were spirit children from the gods. For the ones that were not killed directly, they were simply abandoned in the evil forest to die. In some instances, the children were killed along with their mothers and their bodies disposed of at the evil forest. The bodies were not buried. They were thrown on the ground in the evil forest and left to be decimated by insects and carnivorous wild animals. Mary Slessor realized that this practice was deeply rooted in the cultural milieu of the people and was widespread beyond Calabar, stretching far to the present-day Akwa Ibom state. The whole of that area was still in its primitive states. Mary Slessor was shocked at what she came to meet. She then took a firm decision to commit herself to the rescue of twins and to redirect the minds of the people on the subject. This was not going to be an easy task. Mary was deeply convinced that twins are from the Creator and not from the devil, as was believed by her host community. She was convinced that the conception and birth of twins is a purely biological issue which had nothing whatsoever to do with the devil, as was touted. To stop the practice, she needed to work so hard to convince the chiefs and other stakeholders in the community at the risk of her life. She was still a young lady at the time and there was so much to be afraid of, but Mary Slessor was so determined to embark on the fight even if it meant losing her life in the process. There were many challenges ahead of her, one of which was the language barrier between her and the locals. Nobody had formal education in the community at the time, and nobody spoke English, Mary Slessor's lingua franca. Communication was thus a huge problem. To surmount this, Mary Slessor spent quality time learning the Efik language of present-day Cross River states. To the surprise of many, she began to speak the Efik language, and in no time she became fluent at it. She thus broke the language barrier and was able to speak directly to the people and convince them on the need to change some cultural practices that were considered inhuman, one of which was the killing of twins and their mothers. Mary Slessor succeeded, and to her greatest joy, the locals stopped the killing of twins and their mothers in Old Town Calabar and its environs. They accepted twins as humans from the Creator. In that process, hundreds of twins and their mothers were saved from death. Twins were also killed in Arochukwu in present-day Abia State, which shares boundary with Cross River State and Akwa Ibom at some point, but through the efforts of Mary Slessor, the practice was stopped. Mary Slessor later moved into other parts of present-day Cross River State and Akwa Ibom State and continued to preach the message that twins and not from the devil. She visited several places in her bid to end the practice. She recorded huge successes. She later heard that there was a place called Okoyong where the killing of twins and their mothers was still very serious. Mary then decided to move to Okoyong and take permanent residence there. Okoyong is in present-day Odukpani local government area of Cross River State. Mary settled there for 15 years and worked assiduously to end harmful traditional practices, principal of which was the killing of twins. Through her efforts, the killing of twins was stopped completely in Okoyong. She adopted every child she found abandoned and sent out twins missionaries to find, protect, and care for them at the mission house. The mission compounds were alive with babies, most of whom were twins. Mary Slessor once served a pair of twins, a boy and a girl, but the boy did not survive. Mary took the girl as her daughter and called her Jenny. She took Jenny home to Scotland with her on at least one visit. Mary Slessor was happy with her exploit on a subject that appeared impossible to change, and the news of her heroic deeds spread across the country and across the shores. Back in Scotland, she was highly celebrated and her deeds were carefully documented for posterity. In Okoyong, Mary Slessor lived in a mud house devoid of every basic amenity. It was the same story in every other community she lived in. She made lots of adjustments to her way of life to be able to cope with the realities of her environment. She lived a life of simplicity and complete devotion to God and the cause of humanity. At Okoyong, Mary Slessor was at home with the people. She was given the name White Queen of Okoyong. She was loved and respected by many. In 1892, Mary Slessor was appointed by the colonial administration as Vice Consul in Okoyong. By this office, Mary presided over native courts, and with her understanding of the Efik language, she did her job with ease, deciding land matters, issues of contracts, and many other recurring issues among the litigants. 13 years after, precisely in 1905, she was appointed as the Vice President of Ikorobong Native Court. In 1913, she was awarded the Order of St. John. Mary was such a versatile personality. She was a missionary and a preacher of the gospel, a human rights activist, social crusader, teacher, humanist, and jurist. Mary Slessor lived her entire life in the service of humanity. For the last 4 decades of her life, Mary Slessor suffered intermittent fevers from the malaria she contracted during her first station in Calabar. However, she never gave up her mission work nor returned permanently to Scotland. The fevers eventually weakened Slessor to the point that she could no longer walk long distances in the rainforest, but had to be pushed along in a handcart by able-bodied young men. At that time, movement of people was largely through bush tracks, as there were no tarred roads nor vehicles in many places. In early January 1915, while at her remote station near Useikoruko, she suffered a much more severe fever. On 13th January 1915, Mary Slessor passed on to the great beyond. She was 67 years old at the time of her death. Her body was transported by water to Duketown for the colonial equivalent of a state funeral. The Union Jack, which was the national flag in Nigeria at the time, covered her coffin. Attendees included the provincial commissioner along with other senior British officials in full uniforms. There was a parade mounted in her honor. Flags at government buildings and schools were flown at half-mast. Nigeria's Governor General at the time, Sir Frederick Lord Lugard, telegraphed his, quote, deepest regrets from Lagos and published a warm eulogy in the government gazette in honor of Mary Slessor. This marked the end of the life and times of one of the greatest missionaries who came to Africa in her youthful age and stayed on for several years to commit her entire life to selfless service to humanity. Her selfless service in Okoyong earned her the Efik title of Obonwan Okoyong, which when translated into English means Queen of Okoyong. This name is still used commonly to refer to her in Calabar till today. Following her death, Mary Slessor has been immortalized in several ways. There is a school named in her honor in Aruchukwu in Abia State. There is also the Mary Slessor Road in Calabar named after her. There is the Mary Slessor roundabout in Calabar, not far from the University of Calabar. There is also the Mary Slessor Church. Wherever her statue is molded for public view in most places in Calabar, Mary Slessor is usually seen carrying twins. There is a female hostel in the University of Nigeria Nsukka named after her, the Mary Slessor Hall. In Achimota School, Ghana, a girl's house was named after her, the Slessor House. In Scotland, where she was born, a bust of Slessor is now in the Hall of Heroes of the National Wallace Monument in Stirling. In Aberdeen, a memorial stands in the city's Union Terrace Gardens, and in Dundee, a new city entrance park is named Slessor Gardens in honor of Mary Slessor. There are also streets named after her in Glasgow, Dundee, and in Coventry in England. Mary Slessor was honored on a 1997 banknote by Clydesdale Bank for the World Heritage Series and Famous Court Series. She was featured on the back of the bank's £10 notes, highlighting her work in Calabar. The note also features a map of Calabar, a lithographic vignette depicting her work with children, and a sailing ship emblem. In 2015, the centenary of her death was celebrated in Calabar and in Scotland. The Church of England specially remembers her on the 11th day of January of every year. Mary Slessor was highly celebrated in life and in death. She came to Africa, settled in Calabar, Greek Town, Old Town, Okoyong, and many other places. She interacted freely with the natives and dedicated herself to the service of God and humanity. She conquered the unsavory practice of the killing of twins and was highly appreciated for her commitment. The name Mary Slessor shall remain in the history books of Nigeria, Africa, Scotland, and the world for many more years to come. Thanks for watching this edition of Back in History, and do remember to subscribe to this channel or follow the page for regular notification on every new video. I remain your friend and host, Ekemini Udim.